Good morning and welcome to the TC Dojo, where you decide what to learn. You choose the topics and we find the experts. Today, it is our great pleasure to have Gail Naylor. Gail was an aerospace engineer for 15 years. She taught herself Visual Basic and became a programmer analyst. She started at Facebook in October 2016 as a contract technical writer and converted to full-time employee in March of 2017. She has a master's degree in English and loves to design outdoor living spaces. She is active in her local STC chapter and is currently the chapter president. It's been my pleasure to have known Gail for several years now. In fact, she's the president of my STC chapter, the East Bay STC. Now, Gail says you can ask questions as we go, so be sure to type them in the question window when you think of them. If you want to ask your question directly to Gail, just put that in there and I'll unmute you when she reaches the next natural break. Hi, Gail. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I will switch control to you, and then it's all yours.
Okay. There
Perfect.
we go. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's really great to be here. It was a bit challenging for me changing careers to become a technical writer, and so I'm really happy to share how I used my open source experience to do that and hope I can help someone else. So long story short, I definitely would not have the job I have now at Facebook without my open source experience. It's not the only thing I did, but it's definitely key, and the advice I got to go work on an open source project is probably the best advice that I have ever gotten, actually. So what is open source? Open source is a term used to describe source to let me start over. Open source is a term that describes projects, source code that is not owned but is licensed for use. And the thing is that's unique about this is it's openly available for modification. So someone can take an open source project, make a copy of it, and change it, and then release it as a different open source project. An example of that is Firefox, the browser, started out as a copy or a fork of the Mozilla project. There are a lot of examples of that. Some are more obscure, but that's one that probably everyone has heard of. The thing is that anyone can contribute to an open source project. Typically, you have to sign a contributor license agreement that just says, hey, I own this content that I'm providing to you, and I'm authorized to distribute it. And by the way, project, you can use my contributions going forward. On the project I worked on, which was Apache Taverna, all of the contributors were volunteers. I think that's probably true of a lot of projects, though projects that are sponsored by large companies such as Google or Facebook likely have employees that are working on the project as well. Oops, here we go. Projects they're really communities. They have their own guidelines and their own culture, so it's something you kind of want to get to know the project and kind of figure out what type of project it is, what type of people are working on it. Anyone who contributes to the project, either code or documentation, is called a contributor. The term committer is used for people who are invited to be project members and who actually vote on releases and other things related to the project. Communicating, when I first started working on Apache Taverna, everything was on the mailing list. All the discussions were on the mailing list. And that's still where you need to have like official discussions and decisions made. We didn't use internet relay chat very much, but the last few years they've used Gitter, a chat app, and so now a lot of the conversations that used to happen on the mailing list happen on Gitter, which makes it maybe a little bit trickier to get involved in. But they still maintain the mailing list and monitor the mailing list and use that for decisions and for getting questions from people who use their product. Contributing, we used GitHub. Also, I maintained some of the website pages, so I used the Apache CMS for that. Issues that you'll find in open source projects typically are licensing. The reason that's important is because open source projects tend to make use of other open source projects to do part of what they want to do, maybe something to do with networking. And then the license for whatever code you bring into your project has to go along with your project's license. It has to be compatible. So those, if you have a big project, those licensing issues can get kind of tricky. So that's something that you'll hear discussed when you're working with open source projects. And then of course they're always looking to get new people to work on the project. When I first started, I didn't realize how many sources of open source projects there are. So I just looked at the Apache Software Foundation because that's the one that I knew. But there are a lot of others, Linux, GitHub, of course, Facebook and Google have open source projects. You can you can Google that information and get a lot of lists of projects that you can think about contributing to. These are just some of the top open source projects from earlier this year. The interesting thing, I think, is that there are a lot of companies that are involved with open source. So you may not be getting paid to work when you're working on an open source project, but that experience is definitely beneficial to companies that will pay you to work. Oops. So my experience gave me some tangible results. Definitely, obviously, kind of skills practice. Markdown you can kind of do at home, but I was not working, and so I didn't have access to some of the other tools that they look for when you're a technical writer. So by being able to use the learn the Apache CMS, use GitHub, I use Jira for issues management and Confluence to collaborate with other people on the project. So that practice and those skills that I developed, I was able to add to my resume, and that contributed to me getting the job that I have. Of course, being able to have relevant and current work samples is a good benefit. And then just kind of learning the language of open source, like licensing, as I was talking about, but also voting, building releases, and working with subject matter experts and getting information from them, which is all has to be remote. But I think equally important for me was the intangible results of just some credibility. So on my resume, I had something that was real tech writing, it was working with other people. That and the confidence gave me that I was doing something that could actually translate to a paying job. So what did I do? First thing, I looked at projects on the Apache Software Foundation, and they have a type of project called incubator projects. These are for new projects. They sort of get shepherded along the path to becoming a real Apache project. And so I thought, new, that's going to be easier. I'll start there. So I looked into the websites of a few of the projects, and I found one that was science-based. The Apache Taverna project develops or has tools that allow scientists to design workflows and experiments that they can run on the computer. So I signed up for their mailing list, and I just started monitoring their conversations. And as you can imagine, nothing made sense for quite a while, but eventually I started to get patterns and things started to make a little bit more sense. I worked through their website, and they had, turns out, quite a lot of material they had developed. So I worked offline to try and understand what their project was and what all the pieces were. And another thing that I found really important was learning to ask questions the right way, the hacker way. So what that really means is just not just asking a question, well, why do you do that, or how does that work, but try to do your homework first and come back and say, okay, I've tried this, I've read that, and I'm confused about this thing over here. And you're more likely to get responses from people. The thing was, this, as I had mentioned, took a while, and I had to be a little bit patient. Oops. So next thing I did, after things started to make a little bit of sense, I noticed that people were confused, not just me, but other people were confused. So it turns out there were several modules that were involved in um, one of the pieces of the project, and people were confused. So I developed a diagram and put it out there, which eventually led to my first contribution. I also focused on new contributors. In this case, they had a Google Summer of Code student, which was great for me because he was asking a lot of questions and I got to benefit from his questions. And later I helped him with his documentation. So the thing I discovered is that confusion and new contributors are really opportunities for you to learn, for me to learn the project and to make a contribution. So I mentioned that there were some modules that were in question, and I created this awesome diagram and sent it out to the mailing list, and nothing happened. Nobody noticed, nobody said anything. Yeah, later found out that the mailing system stripped out all the attachments. So that didn't work. So how I really got noticed was I created a WordPress blog, and I put the diagram and some description on that and sent a link in the mailing list. That worked. One of the longtime project members just loved the diagram, and that's how it became part of the Taverna documentation. So I ended up using the WordPress blog a lot when I was working with the student. So as I said, I had learned from his questions, and I helped him with his documentation by suggesting my own sort of documentation and saying, hey, this is what I think. I was a little confused about this. So it gave me something that I could say, look, I did this documentation, but it also helped him because his first language wasn't English. So it was kind of a good opportunity for both of us there. Turns out the project was not new. It only was new to Apache. So it was really a very mature project with a pretty complex set of modules. And so this turned out to be a really good way for me to get my foot in the door on the project, because otherwise it was a little bit complicated to try and figure out from remotely. I also helped maintain the website, and it was really ideal. While not too long after I started, they had a major release. So I was able to participate in the release, but what I discovered is there are a lot of steps in the release and a lot of tools and things that people assume, that software engineers assume that everybody knows, which I didn't know. So I had to ask a lot of questions and do a lot of homework and digging, and that allowed me to create a fairly detailed release procedure, which is a release and how to vote on an open source Apache release, which is something that they didn't have before. And in fact, I couldn't find elsewhere on the Apache website. So that was something that I was able to contribute, which is another thing. And when there's something big going on, it's definitely easier to find some way to contribute. So you kind of need to look for an active project in order to get your foot in the door. In terms of becoming a committer, this was partly a case of being in the right place at the right time, because this project was looking to graduate from the incubator, and they needed to show sort of an active community and to be adding contributors. But the real reason I found out that they invited me to be a contributor is because of my mentoring of the Google Summer of Code student. It was just something I kind of naturally do, partly my education background, but that turned out to be something that was important to this project. Also, if you're active, you're going to stand out because a lot of people come and go, and so that the fact that I was active is also led to my becoming a committer. And it seems like what I've been able to see, projects are most projects, or at least smaller ones anyway, are usually looking to grow their community, which gives you a good opportunity. So I found a project, I got noticed, made some contributions. Did this really help me get a job? And the bottom line is definitely yes. I mean, personal connection definitely played a role, but I mean, at that point on my resume, the top line was math tutor. So I just don't really think Facebook would have interviewed me if I hadn't had something a little bit more relevant on my resume and in my portfolio. And actually, the Git and Markdown experience that I gained, that was something that they asked me in March when I interviewed for a full-time position. That and my open source experience definitely made me a better looking candidate for them and much more likely for them to hire me. The work samples is another good thing for my portfolio, and maybe some prestige from being an Apache committer if you're working with someone who's involved in open source. So as I mentioned, it wasn't the only thing I did. I made connections, which helped me get an email from Facebook to have an interview, phone interview. And that came from my being involved in STC. But I also joined the Write the Docs meetup and met a lot of people that way. I took a lot of classes to improve my coding skills. They were a little old, so I improved them and read a lot of textbooks, articles, blogs, wrote a lot. I did a lot as I was working towards this career transition. But for me, I think open source is really the key. So what I did in summary was I kind of lurked on the mailing list. I learned about the project and the people, and then I looked for ways to contribute and get notice. And new people and opportunities, like when people are confused about something, are definitely ways to get to contribute. It's important, I think, to become a part of the community and participate in discussions. That not only gets you noticed, but you start building relationships, and you get to be actually part of the part of the community. So, in bottom line is get in there, and you just got to contribute. So I mentioned the how to ask questions the hacker way, and so that's the first resource on this list. I've got some links to STC, the classes that I took at Lynda and Coursera and Code School. I didn't try software carpentry, but I've heard good things about that. And FYI, the Apache Taverna website and my Taverna blog that I used to contribute things to Apache Taverna, I've listed. For me, the transition process really seemed to take forever. I look back, it's not that long, but it felt like it was a really long time. And until I got the email from Facebook, I was absolutely unclear that I was going to be able to successfully transition. So one thing I would say is that sometimes the light at the end of the tunnel is hidden around a corner. So be patient, be persistent, and keep going. So thank you and good luck.
Excellent. Thank you, Gail. That was fantastic. Can you hear me? Am I here?
Yeah.
Okay, good. We have a couple of questions, but now's the time, folks, for you to type in your questions. Let me tell you what's coming up while you do that. That was great. Thank you, Gail. The first thing I'm going to mention is the TC Dojo Mastermind. This is a monthly driven discussion group, a community of practice where attendees present their specific challenges on topics in their mind in a confidential, supportive environment. We have a couple going on right now. One is Everything TechCom. It covers DITA, to topic-based authoring, to the specifics of cross-references. The others are product focused. One is ArborText and one is Windchill. It's collaborative and really fun to participate in, and a guaranteed way to make sure you get your questions answered when you need them. You can sign up at the TC Dojo website. Also, coming up in January, for anybody who is within a short flight or close to Santa Clara, California, we have TC Camp coming up. This will be our 6th, I believe, maybe 7th event. We have a full day API doc writing workshop on Friday the 26th. The main camp is Saturday the 27th. I see I've got that slide slightly wrong. We're working on scheduling the morning workshops for Saturday. Right now we have Dawn Stevens from Comtech coming to teach minimalism, and we're looking for instructors and currently scheduling the last couple of workshops. Right now you can see on the slide we've got a voting right now. So if you think you're going to come to camp and you want to say, hey, I'd rather have SEO instead of Git, or I'd rather have Git instead of UI UX, now's the time to get your votes in. All the attendees vote on what they want to talk about, and then we figure out somebody who is qualified to teach that instruction. And at our next TC Dojo coming up in December, we're going to do a special tools focused session. We're going to talk about how to define what comes up when you create a new document in ArborText. For example, you can define what the default data reference looks like, what tags appeared by default whenever you create a new reference topic. We'll talk about the basics for changing the new topic templates so they more resemble what your content needs. If you're an ArborText or data user, you won't want to miss it. All right, let's get to those. If you want to know how to sign up for the TC Dojo, it's best to be part of the mailing list because you'll get everything notified automatically, but you can just go to tcdojo.org and you can see what's coming up and vote for session topics also. All right, thank you, Gail. We've got one really good question. This is one that I hear all the time, actually. I would like to know how one can choose an open source project because there are so many. How did you pick yours?
So that is very true, and it's hard to tell when you're just looking at the titles and maybe a little bit of summary information. You know, it's really hard to know. So I looked at several, and they just didn't strike me. I think I just I wanted to pick something that I related to. So I could have picked something that was completely unrelated and done okay, but for me, the fact that the Apache Taverna project had a science aspect to it, and one of their modules is even used by astronomers, and that was my undergraduate degree. I was an astronomy major, so it had a connection for me, and so I think that's what really got me started on it. And then I think you have to also maybe watch the mailing list for a while and see what's going on. And, you know, even if the project sounded interesting, if there's nothing going on, you probably want to find another project.
All right, excellent. Good question. Great answer. Let's see. I saw a presentation from someone at Docker years ago, and she said working on open source projects was remarkably satisfying because contributors who were non-native English speakers were happy when a tech writer came in and made their documentation good English. Did you find that also?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Yeah, in fact, not only was the Google Summer of Code student not a native English speaker, but it turns out one of the major original project leaders was not a native English speaker too. So it was very gratifying because once he got to know me and I had done some stuff, he was like, okay, I don't know how to do this. Go make this better. And that was really nice. Like, yes, I have a role. And the student was extremely appreciative of my helping him with his English, and I feel like I was really making a good contribution that way.
Awesome. That's really good to hear because often, you know, tech writers are the last people on the chain and are not as appreciated, but that sounds like a great way to get started too, especially if you're changing careers.
Yeah, it was.
Awesome. All right. So, and you said one of the things that got you attention was the mentoring. I can tell that you do that all the time because you're also a volunteer for the East Bay STC. Did you always do that kind of thing?
I've been doing it probably, I think I got started when we moved to the Bay Area and I started volunteering in my kids' classes, and I just discovered it was something I really, really enjoyed. So I'm always kind of looking for opportunities to do that. I'm mentoring a couple of new contract technical writers at Facebook, and I'm enjoying that too.
Excellent. And that probably is great for visibility in the company as well. Cool. Here's one. What about testers? Are there roles for that?
For people who test software,
Yeah, on an open source project.
absolutely. Absolutely. I think that that's something that doesn't always get done as thoroughly as it needs to. So I would say absolutely.
All right, excellent. Here we have one says excellent information, double exclamation points. That's great. And we will post the slides on the event page, so be sure you're on the mailing list so that you can get the link to the video that we recorded today and the slides. And thank you, Gail, for coming and doing this. We really appreciate it. It's a great
You're
story.
very welcome. You're very welcome. Thank you.
All right, everyone. Thanks for coming and see you next time.